I am a DPhil student at the University of Oxford. Sorry I couldn't be there with you in person, but actually it turned out quite well as I'm a bit poorly. So everything's been great so far. So thank you for everyone for your talks. I did an internship in the summer with TVERC, and in my DPhil, I do spatial distribution or species distribution modeling, actually for dung beetles in Africa, but I have some spatial skills that I wanted to use for internship for TVERC. So I basically mapped recording effort across Oxfordshire and Berkshire, and I'm going to talk you through it now. So my first map that I created was of recording effort from pre-1950 to June 2022, which is when I did my internship. Each of these squares is about 750 to 600 meters, more or less. And you can see that the records are most densely clustered around Oxfordshire and the southeast, Oxford rather, and the southeast of Oxfordshire and Berkshire. And I also wanted to know whether of these over 500,000 records, not only where they were most densely clustered, but also whether any of these squares had over 10,000 records. It turns out that they did, but it was only 3: Whitecross Green Woods, the Chilterns Escarpment South, and Bowdown and Chamberhouse Woods. The difficulty with maps like this is knowing whether this is an indication of butterfly density or just recording density. But what's really helpful is that when you create a species distribution model, you can use this sort of file as a layer to reduce the bias in the modeling process. Okay, so this shows how the recording has changed over time. You can see that there's a general increase until there's a boom in the 2015 to 2019 period. As of June this year, there was about approximately 30% of the previous period's numbers. So we would expect now to be at about 120,000 if we were to meet the previous period's numbers, although I'm not sure really what we're at this point. So this is just to demonstrate the growth in recording effort. And hopefully you can see the animation, which is a visual representation of the graph. So you can see the general increase across the whole region until about 2000, where some hotspots appear and then strengthen and remain. And then you can see in 2015 that boom across the whole region. So I'll let you watch it one more time so you can see that it's quite random until the 2000s. Okay, so it's worth noting that the hotspots do overlap with the recorded wildlife sites, so SSSIs or designated sites, and also local wildlife sites, which is to be expected. So then I wanted to see where recording effort has changed. So these white areas are the sites that I've just mentioned, so a combined layer of designated sites, local wildlife sites. And in this analysis, you can see that the pink squares are where there was more records in the period 2000 to 2014, and then there was in the 2015 to the present period, and then the blue squares are where there's no records since 2000, to be differentiated from the blank squares where there are no records. So this asks the question, where has recording effort decreased from the current period to the previous period? And surprisingly, quite a lot of the pink squares where recording has decreased are in these wildlife sites. So then I wanted to use this, I got rid of the noise a little bit, and to see which of our wildlife sites particularly have areas in which the recording has decreased. To ask the question where we should send recorders to bolster our numbers. I also created a file of the names of these sites, so they're not, no one's expected to just look at the map and know instinctively where that is. So yeah, you can see that quite a few of our wildlife sites have areas where recording has dropped from the previous period. So rather than just looking at record numbers, I thought it would be interesting to consider some other criteria. As part of a previous project, someone else put together a layer or a list of accessible wildlife sites where they considered whether sites were open throughout the year or opening times, or whether you had to pay to enter, for example. So I considered whether these sites that we saw on the previous slide that need new records are also part of these accessible sites. I then also built on this. So these are accessible wildlife sites. Your pink ones have limited access, so that doesn't mean that you can't get in, but rather that you can't get in all the time. But these are also free to enter. And then I also established which of these sites were within 100 meters of bus stop, potentially people without access to a car, but also because of being mindful of our eco footprint. And then furthermore, of the sites that fulfill the previous criteria, which have less than 500 records in total. So in need of new records and easier to access, free to enter, and close to public transport. Furthermore, some of these accessible sites and sites that fulfill all of these criteria, and as a side note, these are the only sites within the region that fulfill all of these criteria. Some of them also, according to the criteria on the previous slide, have parts within the sites that have either reduced records or no records. And that's not to say that the whole site doesn't have records or has reduced records, but at least part of them does. Again, I put these together in a list, but it's a much shorter list. And then I considered one further alternative set of criteria. So there are sites, local wildlife sites, that have been earmarked as sites of interest for butterflies already. So I wanted to see if any of these have reduced recording numbers from our current period from our previous period. And it turns out that that was true. In fact, 45 of them have sections where recording has dropped from the previous period. So what we're trying to do is find sites that were previously had very high density records and where we can improve our numbers for the current period. Lastly, I considered what more could be done. So I do species distribution modeling, and so I'm always thinking about what further research can be done with this kind of amazing data set. I thought we could think about whether the increase in record density, the original increase, coincided with site designation, to consider whether you could hypothesize that designating sites could lead to an improved understanding of our biodiversity. And then also, if you bring in layers, habitat layers, climate layers, I could then build species distribution models for priority species to understand not only where record numbers indicate that we could find these species, but also where the habitat is most likely that they will be found also. So strengthening our argument for looking in those places. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I will stop the presentation now, and then hopefully you'll be able to see me if it works. And also I'd be happy to take any questions over email as well.